quorum, so I call the third session of the annual town meeting to order. I'll ask the town clerk to to read the return of notice.
Adjourned annual town meeting of the session held on April 30, 2008. I, Dolores A. Keefe, Town Clerk, do hereby certify that I gave notice of the adjourned session of the annual town meeting held on April 30th, 2008 by posting an attested copy of the notice of adjournment on the town clerk's official bulletin board in the town hall and at least 5 places in the town, giving notice that the annual town meeting had not been completed and had been adjourned to meet again on Monday, May 5, 2008 at the Belmont High School auditorium at 7:30 p.m., briefly stating the business to be acted upon, all in accordance with the Representative Town Meeting Act of 1926 as amended and Section 2.5 of the General Bylaws of the town.
Thank you. We will follow the same procedures and rules as we have in the first 2 meetings. We'll have the same tellers and also the same committees invited to the floor. I do want to add 3 specific requests for tonight. The first is to make sure that when you come to the microphone to state your name and precinct, please, because in some cases that wasn't done or wasn't done clearly, and it's important for our record that we have that done clearly. Secondly, received, including from the stenographer and some others, some concerns that they weren't able to hear some of the speakers, and there was some background noise, so I'd ask you to respect the town meeting deliberations, and if you need to have a conversation, that you try to just step out and do it outside the hall. And thirdly, I would ask that any follow-up questions that you have, that you ask those through the moderator. I think in that way we can make sure we maintain a civil discourse and that we don't get into an unchecked back and forth that sort of undercuts the tenor of the meeting. So if you would just kindly ask any follow-up question through the moderator or a follow-up comment that you would make when you're at the microphone, that would be helpful, I think. With that, we can begin. Mr. Ferenzi, do you want to read Article 20? We're going to read both motions under Article 20. We're going to discuss the 2 motions together, this whole article together, and then at the end we'll take separate votes on each of the motions. But these are a united whole for discussion purposes. For your information, the first motion on Article 20 takes a majority vote. The second motion takes a 2/3 vote. Mr. Ferenzi?
Mr. Moderator, Angelo Ferenzi, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. Move that the town discontinue a portion of Horn Road as a public way for all purposes for a distance of approximately 125 feet on the southerly side of the way and approximately 150 feet on the northerly side of the way, and shown as the discontinued section of Horn Road on a plan entitled Cushing Square, Belmont, Mass. 02478. Lot compilation. I had trouble with that word last time, too, huh? Compilation plan dated May 3rd, 2008, made by R.J. O'Connell and Associates, Incorporated, a copy of which is on file with the town clerk, subject to the reservation of pedestrian access in said way, and further authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by purchase, gift, eminent domain, or otherwise a pedestrian access easement and a utility easement over the discontinued portion of Horn Road in a location and width to be determined by the Board of Selectmen, provided that the petitioner of the request to discontinue Horn Road shall provide satisfactory security to the Board of Selectmen, indemnifying the town for all damages arising from said discontinuance as required under General Law, Chapter 82, Section 24, and provided further that said discontinuance shall become effective only upon the conveyance of the parcel of land identified as Lot 12-211A pursuant to the vote of town meeting under this article.
Thank you. Does the warrant committee have a report?
Warrant Committee unanimously recommends favorable action.
Capital Budget Committee?
Capital Budget Committee recommends favorable action by a vote of 4 to 1.
And the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Frenzy?
The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommend approval, favorable action.
Great, thank you. And if you could read the second article, please.
Second article, move that the town transfer the care, custody, and management and control of a parcel of land identified as Lot 12-211A, shown as 116 Trapella Road, as shown on a plan entitled Cushing Square, Belmont, Mass. 02478, Lot Compilation Plan dated March 3, 2008, made by R.J. O'Connell and Associates, Incorporated, on file with the town clerk from the Board of Selectmen, currently held for the fire station, and general municipal purposes to the Board of Selectmen, to be held for the purpose of conveyance, and authorized the Board of Selectmen to convey said parcel in accordance with the requirements of the Uniform Procurement Act, General Laws of Chapter 30B, Section 16, provided, however, that said conveyance shall be conditioned on A, the town acquiring by purchase, gift, eminent domain, or otherwise a public parking easement for at least 50 spaces within the Cushing Square Overlay Zoning District, which the Board of Selectmen is hereby authorized to acquire in the name of the town, and B, design and site plan approval of the Planning Board for any improvement of said land and issuances of any and all special permits which may be required for development of said parcel in accordance with the requirements of the zoning bylaw applicable to the Cushing Square Overlay District or otherwise, and D, the expiration of all applicable appeal periods and on or termination of any pending appeal, and further authorize the Board of Selectmen to take all action necessary to accomplish this vote.
Does the warrant committee have a report?
Well, the Warrant Committee voted 11 to recommend favorable action, 11 in favor, 2 abstaining. The wording that we approved was just ever so slightly different than that which Mr. Ferenzi just read. And the difference is in Clause D. And what we have says, the expiration of all applicable appeal periods, therefore, comma, without appeal by parties in interest.
Is that the latest one? The one what I'm reading is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't think you read the latest one, Mr. Frenzy.
I'm just reporting on what the Warrant Committee voted on here, so.
Do we have this on this, could we put this on the screen?
2 abstaining.
I am sorry.
In favor, 2
I am
abstaining.
sorry. Let me reread that. Thank you. May I reread that?
Yeah, so you'll reread the second
Let
motion.
me reread the second motion, just paragraph D, which is the only change. Paragraph D should read, the expiration of all applicable appeal periods, therefore, without appeal by parties in interest, and further authorize the Board of Selectmen to take all necessary action to accomplish this vote.
That is what the Warrant Committee voted, 11 in favor, 2 abstaining on.
Thank you.
That is the correct motion.
Capital Budget Committee
Capital Budget Committee voted 3 in favor, 2 abstaining.
and the Board of Selectmen.
The Board of Selectmen voted unanimously in favor of the articles, the motion.
So, Mr. Frenzy, do you want to give a brief overview of this article, these two motions?
Yes, I would, Mr. Murray. I'd like to begin by apologizing for trying to rush this article through last Wednesday night. Many of us were just too enthusiastic. As a result of numerous meetings and much work by a lot of different people, we had reached an understanding that the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, the Warrant and Capital Budget Committees, and the neighborhood associations were all going to recommend favorable action on this article. Unfortunately, we forgot that the town meeting members still needed to be fully informed on the issues before you would be in a position to vote on the motions. I was also concerned that our attempt to push town meeting to a vote might be perceived by some as arrogance, or even an indication of some sort of special deal for a particular developer. Although there is a likely developer, you can rest assured that all of us are going to be doing what we feel is the overall best interest of the town, and there are no other motivations. Hopefully tonight we'll do a better job of explaining what's going on. As you heard, there were two motions to this article. The process for a developer to have access to each of these parcels is substantially different. Granting anyone access to develop the parking lot through either sale or lease requires an open RFP process as outlined in Chapter 30 of the General Laws. Anyone can respond to the RFP, and the town is free to reject all proposals if it felt none were acceptable. On the other hand, public access to Horn Road is through an easement. Once the easement is removed, and assuming the abutters agree to the conditions of the removal, the property reverts to the abutters. This is the reason the removal of the easement is being made contingent on conveyance of the parking lot. In other words, we don't want one to happen without the other one happening. Jay Skloot will be making a presentation in a moment reviewing the Cushing Square Overlay District, its requirements, and its ramifications. But before that, I'd like to make a few other comments. As I said the other night, when the Board of Selectmen voted to place this article on the warrant, our original wording assumed that it was understood that some basic requirements would be included in the RFP for the sale or lease of the parking lot. We assumed everybody understood that any award in response to the RFP would require that a developer's proposal must adhere to the requirements of the Cushing Square Overlay District or its underlying zoning. We also assumed that no conveyance of the property would ever take place without a complete and impartial planning board hearing process and would be contingent on design and site plan approval and the issuances of any necessary permits. We were confident that the planning board process would ensure that the concerns of all interested parties would be addressed before any such permits would be issued. We quickly learned that our assumptions were incorrect. They were not apparent. We learned of substantial neighborhood objections to the article and found that terms to grant approval to the Board of Selectmen to dispose of the property needed to be crystal clear and in writing. With neighborhood objection, both the Warrant Committee and Capital Budget Committees recommended to the Board of Selectmen that the article be dismissed. They felt without neighborhood support, the article would never receive the 2/3 majority it needed to pass. Further, they suggested that we should wait until the motions could be written more specifically to try and minimize neighborhood objections. Personally, I was uncomfortable with any potential delay for a variety of reasons. We were asked the other night, why the urgency? Some of us were concerned that we would be delaying the project unnecessarily and stood the chance of jeopardizing a project that had presented some interesting opportunities that should be pursued. For my part, I wanted to get the process moving, recognizing that any delays would negatively impact the opportunity for trade-offs. The decision on any project of this nature are seriously impacted by the overall economics from the developer's perspective. Both the usable square foot size of the project and the cost of money for the time it takes to get permitted figure prominently into the calculation of a developer's return. Any money not spent in carrying costs could be used to trade off something else, like project costs. Finally, the sooner a desirable project is built, the sooner the town can start generating additional tax revenue, which, depending upon what is finally approved, could easily exceed $750,000 a year. We also were headed toward a classic catch-22 situation. It appeared the Board of Selectmen would not be given authority to send out an RFP for the parking lot until specific details of the project were defined. And it was impossible for any developer to propose a specific project that included either the parking lot or Horn Road unless he knew what his deal was going to be for those parcels. In summary, there are a lot of moving parts here, and many people have been working tirelessly to define a process which ensures that everyone's concerns are heard and considered. I am hopeful that we will be able to demonstrate this to you, to all of you as well. I have full confidence that this process will result in a project of which everybody can be proud. I'm now going to turn the podium over to Jay for his presentation, and then we can take any questions that any of you might have. Hopefully, you'll be comfortable in joining us in supporting these motions so the town will be in a position to accept and evaluate all development proposals for this block of Cushing Square. Our expectations are that this process will allow us to see proposals with potential for great benefit to the town. Thank you.
Mr. Skloot and the Planning Board?
Jay Skloot, Town Planner. What I'm hoping to talk about tonight and to accomplish is 3 steps. There are several reasons for doing this. This is obviously part of the overlay. Many of you, or some of you, are new town meeting members and weren't here when the overlay was passed 2 years ago. Some of you may have forgotten some of the details about that entire process. So I thought it appropriate to give a very quick, and I promise to be brief, I'm not going to go on forever, but a quick review of the overlay district, its intent, the map showing the area, what the goals and objectives were, what some of the benefits to the town, to the developer, and some of the safeguards for the residents are that are part of the bylaw. I'm then going to turn directly to Article 20. Article 20, in many ways, is actually the second step in the revitalization process. The first thing you do is you pass the zoning. The second thing that happens is you need to, very often, encourage a developer to come in, to actually propose a development that perhaps is better than what is immediately apparent. Don't know that? Like all of you, we have seen the conceptual plans, but we have had no formal development proposed to us yet. But the second step would be, and would normally be, again, sort of how do you encourage a developer to come forward? The third step is the actual project review. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on that, but because many of the concerns that have been raised relate to that project, whatever that project may be, I wanted to give you a quick idea of the project review, what is involved in that review, and what the planning board would actually take a look at. Next slide. This, outlined in red, is the Cushing Square Overlay District. It is a fairly big district. It's much bigger than just what I call the Horn Road block. That's the Horn Road block. You can see the overlay goes beyond that, comes up here, comes down as far as Willow Street, and goes all the way down to Belmont. That is the entire area of the overlay district. Next slide. When we began the discussion and the study of the overlay district, there were some clear goals that came out of that. And I'm trying to use the pointer at the same time as I'm speaking into the mic. So if you can't hear me, raise your hands and we'll try. The main goal, I shouldn't say main, but one of the primary goals of the overlay district was to foster a thriving business community by encouraging investment in the Cushing Square area. A second goal, and again equally important, was balancing that commercial revitalization effort with residential needs and concerns. Right from the very beginning, the planning board in this process was cognizant that we were talking about an area next door to a residential neighborhood. We didn't want to minimize that. What are some of the objectives? Promoting mixed-use development. I'm sure all of you know mixed use is essentially residential with retail on the first or second story, residential on the upper floors. Second objective, improving the design of the existing and any new buildings. We felt, the planning board felt, that design is an important criterion, particularly as you relate to how does a potential project blend into the neighboring residential area. We were concerned that we wanted to improve the streetscape, benches, furnishings, trees, shrubs, and other plantings. We wanted to improve what Cushing Square looks like. And finally, The objective was to promote a more pedestrian-oriented and safer square. Very clearly, the goal in the overlay was that Cushing Square should be pedestrian-oriented. We wanted people to get out of their cars and walk around in the area, looking at, hopefully, what would be new and vibrant stores. Next slide. Incentives for property owners. We're going to do a streamlined permit process. Everything goes through the planning board. There's a special permit. If it's required, it is the planning board. Site plan review, design and site plan review goes through the planning board. We had heard that a problem with development was the lengthy permitting process. Normally, special permits are within the domain of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Having to go to 2 different bodies lengthens the time. Increased building height. There was a feeling that we needed to allow for an increased height in order to get the investment that we were looking for. The ability to attract an anchor tenant. A key in many retail developments is to have that one larger tenant. Macy's, or Filene's before that, is an example of one of the reasons that Belmont Center is as vibrant as it is. It has that anchor tenant. And we also encouraged reduced parking. In part, that fits in with the smart growth ideas. We have public transit nearby. There's bus routes, and so we felt that you could reduce the parking requirements. Benefits for the town. More attractive and vibrant square. A greater variety of businesses. And again, we heard that. We're getting tired of, and I apologize to anyone that may be connected with pizza parlors or beauty shops, but we wanted different businesses to come to the Cushing Square. We also wanted to increase the housing options available. That's part of the mixed use, allowing, apartments or smaller condominium. That really depends on whatever a developer proposes. But we wanted to increase the housing options available to people in the town. And yes, this does fall under the inclusionary zoning, so whatever housing is proposed would have to meet that part of the bylaw. We also, obviously, were very interested in increasing the tax base, clearly a benefit to the town. And finally, the other benefit, again, is this pedestrian-friendly commercial center. We are also, and we're very much concerned about ensuring that there was protection for the residents. The bylaw, within the bylaw, part of the regulation is greater setbacks on the upper stories. There are rear yard setbacks where you're abutting a residential property. Those are setbacks that are written into the bylaw. That's not a negotiated setback. Improved design. There is a section of the overlay that talks about design and site plan. What type of buildings are we looking for in Belmont? Increased flexibility and greater control over design and development. The flexibility comes in a larger area. If you're able to accumulate more parcels, there's increased flexibility in the type of development you may be proposing. Part of that comes back to the parking lot and the portion of Horn Road that's being closed, or asked to be closed. Allowing those parcels to be part of a development increases the flexibility and what a developer may propose. Finally, all of this was governed by a special permit criteria, which is really designed to control the massing of the buildings. Special permit is something that you can say no to. Design and site plan review is not as clear-cut. But a special permit is you are granting a permit, and you can say no if you believe that whatever is being proposed is out of scale, doesn't fit, whatever that is. Next. So that is the area of the overlay. Next slide. This is the parking lot. This is the portion of Horn Road that is asked to be discontinued. I bring this slide up within the boundaries of the overlay so you'll recognize that this was always part of the consideration. During the entire planning board hearing, all right, we never excluded either the municipal lot or that part of Horn Road. As a matter of fact, some of our slides showed a parking garage on top of the municipal lot. Now, without knowing what development is proposed, we obviously didn't have any specifics, but there was a great deal of discussion. As a matter of fact, the neighbors actually raised the concern and asked whether or not that portion of Horn Road could be closed. Again, the point that I'm making here is not related to any particular project or proposal, simply that these parcels were always part of the discussion. This is not something new that just came up. How they get utilized is part of project review, and we'll talk about that later. This is a smaller map of the area, and I put this up because I wanted to show you that we're beginning to use our GIS capabilities in town. Again, here's the municipal parking lot, here's the piece of Horn Road that would be discontinued. Next. Why are we asking for these parcels? I've obviously covered this ground a little bit, but we'll talk a little bit about it. What is the purpose of trying to include these parcels or getting permission to negotiate on these parcels? We want to encourage investment and redevelopment of Cushing Square. Those two parcels are approximately 20,000 square feet. They add almost 25% to the potential area that a developer could use. If you remember the map, the entire block there is roughly 85,000 square feet. Without those two parcels, you're down to 65,000 square feet. Not saying you can't do a development on 65,000 square feet, but there's more flexibility, more potential for development. The other thing that has come up was the question on closing of Horn Road. One of the benefits of closing Horn Road is reducing the neighborhood traffic impact. And we've had some unofficial studies that talk about, or that show that about 80% of the cars on a daily basis that travel down Horn Road do not belong to residents. They don't come to Horn Road properties or to Poplar Street. They're basically using that to get either around the square or whatever. The neighbors were concerned about that, and so that is a benefit or part of the purpose for closing Horn Road. The timing, as I mentioned earlier, this is really the second step in the revitalization process. This is intended to encourage developers to step forward, provide us with creative, different types of ideas. It is not, well, should have been proposed earlier. We could have certainly come forward as a planning board and begun this discussion last year after the overlay was passed. I suspect most of you would have said, why are you bringing it forward now without having a project in front of you or having any way to really assess the pros and cons of doing this? And that would have been a fair question, just as it is now. Finally, we're not trying to hide anything. Clearly, a developer has expressed an interest in this property. We would like to be able to review that project, whatever that project may turn out to be, and really then make a judgment on the pros and cons with neighborhood input, with input from the businesses that are in Cushing Square, with input from any of you that want to attend any of the meetings of the planning board. But without this article, we don't get to review the project that has been proposed. So I'm not going to, sit here and deny that a project is not part of the impetus for why this has come forward. It clearly is. It's not unusual for many things within the planning world to be driven by a project or an opportunity that arises. Next. Article 20, what are the conditions that have been talked about or that are actually part of the motion. I'm going to start with the conveyance of the municipal lot because that's really the key to understanding what and the way these motions have been written. First of all, one of the conditions is that any development, whatever is proposed, whatever is bid on that municipal lot, the successful bidder must replace the 50 parking spaces. During the planning board discussions, we did not mandate that they needed to be replaced on the same site. Depending on what the actual development proposal is, they could be replaced anywhere within that development. But 50 spaces had to be replaced and were public spaces available to anyone that wants to frequent any business in Cushing Square and not reserved for the development itself. That was condition number one. Condition number two, there has to be a complete review by the planning board of any proposed development. This is prior to the conveyance. Okay? That goes into the RFP. It's part of the developer or whoever intends to bid knows these things beforehand. And these are not negotiable by the Board of Selectmen. All permits must be issued. It has to go through the complete review process. If there's appeals, those appeals have to run their course. The permits have to be issued before final conveyance. Again, it's another safeguard. And again, at the end, it has to be a completely approved project with the input of all the parties prior to the actual transfer, prior to the actual conveyance. So there's no conveyance if the project does not get approved, if it bogs down or whatever happens. There may be an RFP, a purchase and sale, but the sale doesn't happen. Closing of Horn Road. Discontinuance of Horn Road. There's an easement that has to be put in place to ensure pedestrian access from Horn Road to Common Street. Again, that is going to be part of a negotiation. What type of easement? The interesting thing is if Horn Road was just discontinued, regardless of who the property owners were, that piece of property would now have been private property, and there wouldn't be any public access if the road was just discontinued. So this guarantees that there's going to be public access along down that end of Horn Road.
Jay, can I add one thing before you move on?
Yep.
Mr. Moderator, if I may.
Sure, Ms.
Jenny Fallon, Chairman of the Planning Board and Town Meeting Member Precinct 1. I just want to add, just for clarity, I think Jay's being very clear about this, but the requirement that there be a special permit before the conveyance of the property means, as Mr. Baghdadi said the other night, that the town, the neighbors, everybody will know what project is going to be built on that site before the property is conveyed. And that's very important to everyone as part of this process, and the Planning Board supports that fully.
Mr. Skloot.
Thank you. And finally, before Horn Road is discontinued, the actual conveyance of the parking lot has to happen. The parking lot doesn't get conveyed until the project is approved. So Horn Road does not get discontinued until the project is approved. They're all tied together. They allow a developer to present something that ordinarily couldn't be presented. But again, nothing happens until everyone agrees that this is the project that is wanted, is desired for Cushing Square. Lost the sheet. All right, what is the process? How does all of this happen? The first thing that happens is the town issues a request for proposals for development of the municipal parking lot. Open bid. Anyone can bid, anyone can come in and submit their offer for the parking lot. Doesn't mean it's going to be a sale, might be a lease. That's part of the negotiation process. but an RFP is issued for use of the municipal parking lot. A developer is selected. The Board of Selectmen go through the process as they have for many other projects in the town, the fire stations and others, I think, are the most recent ones, and select a developer and then begin the negotiation. The developer submits a project application. Whether bids on just the parking lot, whether they control other parcels next to the parking lot, next to Horn Road, a project application gets submitted. The planning board conducts its public review of the project. There's a project approval. Then there is the conveyance of the town municipal lot, the actual signing of the paperwork or the transfer of money or whatever happens at that particular conveyance. And then Horn Road is discontinued officially. That is essentially what Article 20 was all about. Now I want to briefly, and it's only one slide, so I promise to be brief again, talk about what is involved in a project review of this type of or within the overlay zone. The first thing is that the planning board is going to be very concerned with the size or the massing of the overall project. That is something that they're going to look at very closely. The height of the buildings. The overlay zone allows 3 stories by special permit. It allows 4 stories if you meet certain conditions. One of those conditions is that the lot has to be over 15,000 square feet in size. The second condition, and it's an or, you have to meet one or the other, is that you're providing underground parking. If you meet either one of those conditions, you may apply for a special permit to go to 4 stories. Within the bylaw, however, there are increased setbacks as you go up higher, so you'll have less of an effect. The top floor can be brought in on either side, so it has less of an impact on the neighboring properties. And again, the entire massing issue is looked at by the planning board. Several design principles that will come into play during the review: pedestrian-oriented scale, socially inviting place. We really want Cushing Square to be a place that people want to come to. They want to walk around there, whether there's some outdoor cafe type settings or whatever. Our hope is that whatever becomes proposed, you folks will all want to be part of it. We also recognize the historic and cultural character of Cushing Square. Any development has to recognize that. We actually had some slides during the whole overlay discussion that showed a lot of glass buildings. They didn't work. And I don't think they would work if that's what's going to be proposed here. Parking is still a concern. We've reduced parking, but if you put in a business that obviously has a high parking demand, whatever that might be, we're going to recognize that. And even if it meets the new parking requirements, we're going to say, it doesn't work. We're sorry, but that business may not work, whatever that might be. And I don't know of anything offhand, I can't think of anything, but there are some businesses that generate a lot more parking than other businesses. And finally, one of the things that's considered is the preservation or renovation of historic structures. It's part of what is considered during the entire review. It's not ignored. It may not work. Again, I don't know. I haven't seen a development. But it is part of the entire review process. Input. This is the most important part. It is the neighbors that will have significant input. It is town residents that will have the input. Other Cushing Square businesses will have input. And town department committees and boards will have input. It is a public process. We hope that you will support Article 20 so that we can proceed with this review and bring something to Belmont that the town, the neighbors, and essentially everyone thinks is something positive for the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skloot. I'll call on Mr. Brown from the Cushing Square Neighborhood Group, and then we'll open it up to town meeting members. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Devin Brown, Precinct 5 Town Meeting Member and member of the Cushing Square Neighborhood Association. I want to share a few brief thoughts about our position on Article 20. We formed the Neighborhood Association when we saw a massive conceptual design for Cushing Square, and when it seemed like the process was moving forward without input from neighbors and town residents. You may have read the articles we wrote in the Belmont Citizen Herald. We think that a monolithic 4-story structure is too much for Cushing Square, and I expect that many of you would share our similar concerns. We want to make it clear, however, that although we're concerned about the design that was first proposed by the developer, we're in full support of Article 20. Article 20 is not a vote for or against the design that's been proposed. Rather, it's a vote about the process by which all interested parties can have input into what might get built on this important site. We expect that a public process involving the planning board, town residents, board of selectmen, the developer, and other interested parties will result in development that meets everybody's needs. We urge you to vote in favor of Article 20 so that we can begin the design process to transform Cushing Square into a vibrant town center. Thank you.
We'll now open this up for discussion. Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Moderator, move that Article 20 be dismissed.
Is there a second?
Identify himself, please.
Oh, Mr. Cohen, please identify yourself.
Martin Cohen, Precinct 3.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded that Article 20 be dismissed. Do you wish to speak to that, Mr. Cohen?
I would like to, yes. Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, I make this motion because I have some serious problems with the article at present. The action is premature and the process is backwards. Let me explain. We're asked to facilitate a potential development, but we do not know what this potential development might be. We are asked, in effect, to approve part of a plan before we know what the plan is. The Cushing Square Neighborhood Association was opposed to Article 20 to the extent of writing, as you just heard, a guest perspective in the Belmont Citizen Herald. But Wednesday night we're told they're in favor. I don't know what assurances they received that made them change their mind, and I'm sure that, or I suspect that members of this House also don't know what was said to them. Now, it's proper for the Neighborhood Association to take a stand on this, very proper, because it is right in their backyard. But it's also an important commercial district for the town. And so the town, the representatives of the town, this town meeting, should have an input into it. We have a duty to our constituents in this respect. The proper procedure is first to have a plan and then to facilitate it. This brings me to the next problem I have with this article. Section 3.5, major development, of our zoning bylaw requires concept plan approval by a 2/3 vote of the town meeting for business development greater than 40,000 square feet. For reference, the Waverly Square supermarket is approximately 40,000 square feet. From what little I know about the potential development here, it is much, much larger than 40,000 square feet. And this Cushing Square overlay exempts development from this section of our bylaw, as it does from any review by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So we have here the strange situation that under the more restrictive underlying zoning, a review of the concept plan by the town meeting is required, besides special permits from the Zoning Board of Appeals, but under the less restrictive overlay, neither of these apply. Indeed, we come to a situation where the total control of any development in this district is under the control of only 8 people, 3 selectmen, 5 members of the planning board. Yes, they will listen to abutters, they will listen to other members of the other citizens of the town, but only those 8 people have the control. And I think that's wrong. So, by dismissing Article 20, we will have the opportunity to consider these same actions in conjunction with a development plan at some later date. We also may be able to amend the Cushing Square overlay zoning in the spirit and intent of Section 3.5 of our zoning bylaw to provide a more comprehensive review than just 8 persons. I urge you to vote for this motion to dismiss.
Is there discussion on the motion to dismiss? Ms. Fallon.
I would just like to respond to a couple of points. I'm sorry, Jenny Fallon, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1, and Chairman of the Planning Board. A couple of points that Mr. Cohen raised. First, he said that he wasn't sure what had changed for the neighbors from the point of view of this article by the time it reached the motion that was presented tonight. And I think Mr. Ferenzi was very, very clear about that in his presentation. There was added to the motion the condition that the special permit must be granted before the conveyance of the property. That was assumed by the Board of Selectmen to be a condition that they would want, but it was not written down. It is now written down, and that changed the way the motion looked to the neighborhood and to other people looking at this. That means, as I said, that everyone will be clear about what project will be built on the property before the property is conveyed or the end of Horn Road is discontinued. Second, I think it's important for town meeting to remember that we cannot, as a planning board, accept a proposal to be evaluated by us unless the person making the proposal, the developer, has control of the properties included in the proposal. Under this motion, it would be possible for us to consider a proposal which included the parking lot and Horn Road, because there could be purchase and sale agreements or other legal documents that would have the condition that the planning board had to finalize the special permit before conveyance, but the agreement would be there to convey the property if that in fact happens. And that would be enough to allow us to reach formal consideration of the project. But without the ability to get that legal connection to the developer for the property, we wouldn't be able to actually have a project before us.
Is there other discussion on the motion to dismiss?
Mr. Moderator, from over here on the warrant committee. I think it would be helpful if Mr. Cohen said that, in his opinion, there are 8 people who basically controlled the fate of Cushing Square, and I think that Sammy Baghdadi would be really helpful if he would explain to town meeting how this Clause D is supposed to work, because I think that's not correct, that there's only 8 people that do this.
Mr. Baghdadi, do you care to
Yes.
take a brief recess? Mr. Baghdadi.
Yes, Sammy Baghdadi, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4, and member of the Planning Board. With all due respect to Mr. Cohen, maybe he has a problem with the procedure granted under the overlay district, okay? But this is a procedure that was enacted by town meeting a couple of years ago. And basically, it did vest in the planning board considerable planning authority on projects in Cushing Square in an effort to streamline the permitting process, as Jay said, and to encourage a revitalization of the area. Please rest assured, this article, okay, actually the two motions, Article 20, I believe vests a lot of protection to the town. Basically, the town has nothing to lose by voting for this article. Specifically, the criticism of the article as previously drafted was it puts the cart before the horse. We were being asked at town meeting to allow a discontinuance of Horn Road and to authorize conveyance of the parking lot without knowing definitively what would go on those parcels, what the development would be. This changes this process around. This says that before the conveyance can become official and before Horn Road can be discontinued, the project has to go through the permitting process through the planning board as this town meeting allowed by passage of the overlay district. This goes so far as to say that even if the developer does not choose to develop under the overlay district, but to develop as allowed by right in the existing zoning, they still have to submit to design and site plan review to the planning board, and they still need to get any special permits before the parking lot can be conveyed and before Horn Road can be discontinued. And then as an added assurance, okay, is this language that Mr. Curtis referred to, this language D, the expiration of all applicable appeal periods, therefore, without appeal by parties in interest. What this means is that if the planning board imposed conditions on the development and the developer was not happy with those conditions, and the developer appealed the planning board's approval, it would nullify the conveyance. So a developer could not try to bypass what the planning board decision is by appealing the decision and trying to take the case to a judge, to a court, arguing, deliberating it in court, and then coming back and saying, aha, now it's mine. By the same token, it does offer the neighborhood a assurance also. Neighbors are parties that can appeal a decision of the planning board. And if the neighbors felt that the planning board was going one way, too much for the side of the developer, the neighborhood group can appeal the decision of the planning board too, and therefore hold up the whole process. So there is plenty of safeguards in this vote. And quite frankly, that is one of the reasons why the neighbors are opposed to the process. It's a process. Bring it before the planning board, bring it rightfully before the planning board, bring it legally before the planning board, and let's all, as a community and as a town, as neighbors, as a developer, discuss it and try to come up with the best possible plan for Cushing Square. Thank you.
Mr. Becker.
Thank you. We neighbors were clearly
Mr. Becker,
concerned.
can you identify?
Don Becker, Precinct 5, Town Meeting Member. We neighbors were clearly concerned when we saw the version of Article 20 that was originally in the town warrant, because it clearly did not seem to give either the neighbors or the town the ability to do what we felt really we needed to do in order to provide input and to have a voice in what was going to be happening to the property and with the property and with the two parcels that are the subject of this Article 20. With this article, we do believe that we do have a voice now. We do believe that the process will be one that everybody can participate in, and I believe that Mr. Baghdadi just said that we oppose the process. In fact, we are strongly in support of the process, which is now contained within Article 20. And I would just like to respond to one comment that Mr. Cohen made, that only 8 people really have control over the process. And I think that what Article 20 now does is to indeed provide input, if not control, into the process, not just by 8 people, but by everybody in the neighborhood and everybody in the town, because as Mr. Baghdadi has pointed out, Mr. Skloot has pointed out, we all have the right to appeal if we don't like the result that the planning board will come up with. We do, however, have great trust and faith in the composition of the planning board. We believe that they are individuals with a great range of experience and with a great ability to have sensitivity to our neighborhood and to the needs of the town to produce a project which everybody will enjoy and which everybody really can be proud of and can be comfortable with. So therefore, those are the reasons in addition to the ones that Mr. Brown discussed and Mr. Baghdadi has discussed and Mr. Skloot. Those are the reasons why we strongly support this article at this time. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Suzanne Robotham, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2. I recently had experience to work with our planning board about development on Pleasant Street with the Leader Bank, and I have a lot of respect and appreciation for all the hard work that the planning board does. But I do agree with Mr. Cohen that only 8 people will have authority to rule in this case, and if any residents or groups would like to appeal the decision, it should be made clear now that they will be doing so at their own expense, as was the situation on Pleasant Street with Leader Bank. I think that's important for town meeting to realize.
Is there other discussion? Yes, Ms. Cobb.
Priscilla Cobb, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. I think it's just important, and I'm not opposed to the project per se, and I have a lot of respect for the planning board, but I do think this is significant, and this is the point where town meeting has a role. I think that's what Marty Cohen was turning our attention to. This is the one time it won't, I think everybody's in agreement, it won't come back to town meeting. And I think unless we're just to be a rubber stamp, that we should take the responsibility seriously of making a decision about the conveyance of the parking lot and the closing of Horn Road. And even though they wouldn't happen till later, this is our chance to have input. And to me, it seems like it's a question of the scale of the project. And as the overlay district was described, it sounds like by adding the square footage, you then get, the developer has the option to go to 4 stories. And I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, but to me, it seems perhaps larger than what we would want there. And I also think if there seem to have been drawings in the paper, it seems like there's some idea out there of what the proposal would be, and I don't see why that isn't fair game for discussion at this point before we vote on this significant decision.